Take the money and disappear from my daughter's life forever. The words landed with the quiet certainty of someone who had never imagined hearing the word no. The leather briefcase rested on the polished mahogany table, its silver clasps already unlatched, revealing neatly stacked bundles totaling $1 million. Sunlight streamed through the towering windows of the Whitmore estate, casting long golden beams across marble floors that had witnessed decades of power, wealth, and impossible decisions. Malcolm Brooks looked at the money without the slightest change in expression. His weathered denim jacket contrasted sharply against the elegant room, and the faint coffee stain on one sleeve made him appear even more out of place. To Evelyn Whitmore, chairman of one of America's most influential technology companies, he looked exactly like the man every mother feared would charm a successful daughter for all the wrong reasons. A struggling black single father, an aging pickup truck, a modest home on the quiet edge of Charlotte. A life that, according to every report she had purchased, possessed absolutely nothing worthy of her daughter. Evelyn folded her hands carefully. You seem like a decent man, Mr. Brooks. That's why I'm making this easy. $1 million. You walk away today, and Charlotte never has to know this conversation happened. Malcolm remained silent for several seconds, his calm unsettling the room more than anger ever could have. The antique grandfather clock echoed softly in the distance, while the scent of fresh lilies drifted from a crystal vase nearby. Even the house staff standing discreetly beyond the doorway sensed that something important was unfolding. Finally, Malcolm lifted his eyes and offered the smallest, most respectful smile. Mrs. Whitmore, he said quietly, have you ever wondered how much a person's dignity is actually worth? Evelyn's expression hardened. She mistook his composure for negotiation. If $1 million isn't enough, we can discuss another number. Malcolm slowly closed the briefcase without touching a single bill. His hands were steady, practiced, almost graceful. There was no resentment in his voice. No wounded pride, only a peace that money had never been able to purchase. What Evelyn could not possibly know was that the man sitting across from her had signed away larger sums before breakfast more times than she could imagine. She believed she was buying the silence of an ordinary father. She had no idea she was speaking to a billionaire who had spent years hiding behind an ordinary life, protecting the only fortune that had ever truly mattered to him. His young daughter and the quiet promise that character should always speak louder than wealth. Malcolm rose from the chair with the same quiet composure he had carried into the mansion. He buttoned the cuff of his faded denim sleeve, gave Evelyn Whitmore a respectful nod, and walked toward the towering front doors without looking back at the briefcase. No dramatic speech, no anger, no attempt to defend himself. The heavy oak doors closed behind him with a gentle click, leaving an unexpected silence hanging over the elegant room. Evelyn watched through the window as Malcolm climbed into an aging blue pickup truck that had clearly seen better days. The engine hesitated before finally coming to life, and within seconds the truck disappeared beyond the iron gates. She folded her arms confidently. To her, she had just handled a problem before it became a family disaster. Meanwhile, Malcolm drove across the city beneath a bright Carolina afternoon sky, passing luxury dealerships, busy office towers, neighborhood diners, and tree-lined streets that had become familiar after years of choosing a life few people understood. His destination was not a penthouse or an exclusive country club. It was Jefferson Elementary School. The moment he stepped out of the truck, a cheerful 8-year-old girl with tightly braided curls spotted him through the school entrance and sprinted across the sidewalk with the unstoppable excitement only children possess. "Daddy!" she called. Malcolm knelt just in time to catch Ava Brooks as she wrapped her arms around his neck. "How was science today?" he asked with a warm smile. "I got every question right," she said proudly. "Mrs. Reynolds said I should think about entering the state robotics competition." Malcolm smiled wider than he had during the entire meeting at the Whitmore estate. "I never doubted you for a second." As they walked toward the truck together, Ava slipped her small hand into his. Several teachers waved politely. Parents who recognized Malcolm greeted him by name. Most knew him only as the kind father who never missed a school concert, volunteered during reading week, and quietly repaired broken playground equipment on weekends without asking for recognition. Few knew anything about his past. Even fewer realized that every Wednesday morning, before driving Ava to school, Malcolm anonymously funded breakfast programs for hundreds of children across 3 counties through a charitable foundation that carried no public connection to his name. That evening, their small brick home filled with familiar comforts. The aroma of homemade chicken soup drifted from the kitchen while soft jazz played from an old speaker on the counter. Ava worked on her homework at the dining table as Malcolm sliced fresh vegetables with practiced ease. Their house was modest but spotless, filled with framed family photographs instead of expensive artwork and shelves lined with library books rather than luxury decorations. It was exactly the life Malcolm had chosen after losing his wife years earlier. Wealth had never eased his grief, and success had never tucked his daughter into bed at night. Those responsibilities belonged only to him. Across town, Charlotte Whitmore stared through the glass wall of her executive office as the evening skyline glowed with thousands of lights. Her assistant had spent the last hour discussing quarterly reports, acquisitions, and shareholder expectations, but Charlotte barely heard a word. Her thoughts remained fixed on Malcolm. She had fallen in love with a man who never tried to impress her, never mentioned money, never cared about titles, and somehow made every ordinary moment feel extraordinary. She had no idea her mother had already begun trying to erase him from her life. The following morning arrived wrapped in a cool breeze that carried the scent of fresh rain across the city. Malcolm pulled his old pickup into the parking lot of a neighborhood grocery store before sunrise, just as he did every Thursday. Ava skipped beside him with a reusable shopping bag almost as big as she was, smiling as they filled 2 carts with canned soup, bread, fruit, milk, and diapers. The cashier smiled knowingly. "The community pantry delivery again?" Malcolm nodded. "There are a few more families this week." Ava proudly handed over a handful of neatly folded coupons she had clipped from the Sunday newspaper. "Daddy says every dollar we save helps another family." The cashier's eyes softened. "Your father is raising a remarkable young lady." Malcolm simply smiled and thanked her. Across town, inside a sleek downtown office overlooking the skyline, Evelyn Whitmore sat at the head of a polished conference table while 2 private investigators reviewed photographs spread neatly before her. Each image seemed to confirm exactly what she wanted to believe. Malcolm leaving Jefferson Elementary in an old pickup truck. Malcolm shopping at discount stores. Malcolm mowing his own lawn. Malcolm carrying groceries into his modest brick home. Malcolm volunteering at the community pantry. One investigator adjusted his glasses before speaking carefully. "Mrs. Whitmore, we have searched property records, tax filings, employment history, and public financial databases. Everything indicates he lives an ordinary middle-class life. No luxury assets. No investment portfolio under his name. No corporate affiliations that stand out." Evelyn leaned back with quiet satisfaction. "And Charlotte believes this man is the love of her life." "Yes, ma'am." She sighed deeply. She is confusing kindness with compatibility. Neither investigator realized that every search they had conducted relied entirely on public records. Malcolm Brooks had spent years constructing legal layers of privacy through trusts, independent boards, and confidential ownership structures that removed his personal name from nearly every major financial document. Nothing they found was false. It was simply incomplete. Later that afternoon, Charlotte arrived unexpectedly at Malcolm's house carrying a small bakery box tied with blue ribbon. Ava opened the front door first and immediately smiled. "Miss Charlotte!" she shouted before throwing her arms around her. Charlotte laughed warmly and hugged her back. "I brought your favorite cinnamon rolls. Daddy only lets me have one," Ava whispered dramatically. Malcolm stepped into the hallway drying his hands on a kitchen towel. "Because someone turns into a tiny tornado after too much frosting." Ava giggled and disappeared toward the dining room. Charlotte looked at Malcolm for a long moment before her smile slowly faded. "Something feels different," she said softly. "Did something happen yesterday?" Malcolm paused. The afternoon sunlight filtered gently through the living room curtains, painting warm patterns across the hardwood floor. He could have told her everything. He could have repeated every word her mother had spoken. Instead, he simply answered with the same quiet honesty that had guided his life for years. Some conversations are easier to carry alone. Charlotte searched his face, sensing a weight he refused to place on her shoulders. She reached for his hand. Whatever it is, you do not have to protect me from it. Malcolm looked down at their hands before meeting her eyes again. Sometimes protecting the people we love means carrying more than they ever know. Neither of them noticed the black luxury sedan parked across the street. Behind its tinted windows, one of Evelyn's investigators quietly photographed the moment. Convinced he had captured evidence of an ordinary man reaching for an extraordinary future, never imagining that the greatest secret in the picture belonged to the man they believed they already understood. 3 days passed without another word from Evelyn Whitmore, yet Malcolm understood that silence did not always mean peace. On a gray Friday afternoon, his phone vibrated while he was replacing a loose shelf inside the community pantry. The message was brief. Please meet me one last time. There are details we should settle with dignity. It was signed only with Evelyn's name. Malcolm stared at the screen for several seconds before slipping the phone back into his pocket. One of the volunteers looked over. Everything all right? Malcolm. He smiled gently. Everything will be. Before leaving, he stopped by Jefferson Elementary to pick up Ava. She climbed into the truck carrying a handmade picture of the three of them standing beneath a bright yellow sun. Charlotte's smiling face had been carefully drawn beside Malcolm and Ava. Mrs. Reynolds asked us to draw our family, Ava explained. I know Charlotte is not my mommy, but she makes our family happier. Malcolm looked at the drawing a little longer than usual before folding it carefully and placing it inside the glove compartment. It is beautiful, he whispered. After dropping Ava at the home of his longtime neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Jenkins, Malcolm drove across town once again. The meeting was not held at the Whitmore estate this time. Evelyn had reserved a private room inside one of the city's oldest country clubs, a place where polished wood walls displayed generations of portraits celebrating influence and success. The hostess escorted Malcolm to a quiet dining room where Evelyn was already waiting beside another leather briefcase. A neatly dressed attorney sat beside her with several legal documents arranged in perfect order. Evelyn did not waste time with pleasantries. Thank you for coming, Mr. Brooks. Malcolm nodded politely and took his seat. The attorney slid a folder across the table. This agreement confirms that you will permanently end your relationship with Miss Whitmore. In exchange, the financial compensation will be transferred immediately. There will also be additional support for your daughter through an educational trust. Malcolm looked at the unopened folder but made no effort to touch it. Evelyn leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. You love your child. I respect that. This money guarantees her future. Charlotte will eventually understand that this is for the best. Malcolm remained silent long enough for the ticking of an antique wall clock to fill the room. The soft notes of a piano drifted from somewhere beyond the dining hall, blending with the faint clinking of fine china. Finally he spoke. My daughter already has everything she truly needs. Evelyn frowned. Every parent says that until reality arrives. Malcolm slowly lifted the folded drawing Ava had made earlier that afternoon and placed it beside the untouched contract. Crayon figures smiled beneath a crooked yellow sun. This is what she believes her future looks like, he said quietly. I cannot exchange a child's trust for any number written on paper. Evelyn's patience began to fade. You are making an emotional decision instead of a practical one. Malcolm carefully stood, buttoned his jacket, and pushed the contract gently back toward the attorney. Sometimes the most practical thing a father can do is refuse an offer that teaches his daughter the wrong lesson. Without another word, he walked toward the exit, leaving the folder unopened, the second briefcase untouched, and a room full of people quietly wondering why an ordinary man could walk away from a fortune with the calm confidence of someone who had never needed it in the first place. The following Monday began with a confidence that quickly unraveled inside Whitmore Technologies. The trading floor monitors glowed red before the opening bell had even finished ringing. Analysts whispered across conference tables. Phones refused to stop buzzing. Overnight, a major institutional investor had quietly withdrawn support from a multi-billion-dollar expansion project that the company had spent 2 years preparing. Charlotte stood inside the executive conference room, reviewing reports that seemed to grow worse every few minutes. "How much did we lose?" she asked. Her chief financial officer took a slow breath before answering. "Almost 18% of market value since pre-market trading. Investors are reacting faster than we expected." Another executive added, "3 banks have paused negotiations until confidence returns." Silence settled over the room like a heavy curtain. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city looked exactly the same. Traffic flowed. Construction cranes moved across the skyline. Ordinary people hurried toward ordinary jobs. Yet inside the boardroom, decades of family legacy suddenly felt fragile. Across town, Malcolm stood beneath the shade of an old oak tree at Jefferson Elementary, watching Ava laugh with classmates during recess while he waited for a scheduled parent-volunteer meeting. Children chased one another across the playground with backpacks bouncing behind them, completely unaware that the adult world measured success with numbers instead of moments. Mrs. Reynolds approached carrying a folder of reading assignments. "Ava says Charlotte might come to family reading day next month." Malcolm smiled softly. "She would like that very much." His phone vibrated once. He glanced at the screen. A single encrypted notification appeared without any company logo or identifying information. "Board requests immediate strategic consultation. Priority level 1. Malcolm read it only once before locking the screen again. Mrs. Reynolds noticed nothing unusual. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Yes," Malcolm answered warmly. "Today belongs to the children." Hundreds of miles away inside a glass tower overlooking Manhattan, several distinguished executives gathered around an unusually quiet conference table. No nameplate marked the empty chair at its head. No photographs identified the owner of the room. One silver-haired director finally broke the silence. "Whitmore Technologies has become vulnerable faster than anyone predicted." Another replied, "If we move now, we could acquire controlling influence within days." A third executive folded his hands thoughtfully. "We should not proceed without his decision." Nobody spoke the man's name aloud. They simply waited. Back in Charlotte, Evelyn entered her daughter's office carrying years of experience but noticeably less certainty than usual. Charlotte looked exhausted. Reports lay scattered across her desk beside untouched coffee that had long gone cold. "Mother," Charlotte said quietly, "our people are scared. Thousands of employees depend on us. This is not just about stock prices anymore." Evelyn nodded slowly. For the first time in many years, she had no immediate solution. "There is one investment group still refusing to answer our calls," she admitted. "If they agree to meet, we may still have a chance." Charlotte looked toward the skyline, her reflection faintly visible against the afternoon sun. "Then I hope whoever leads that group still believes character matters more than opportunity." At almost the same moment, Malcolm finished helping several children organize library books before walking calmly toward his old pickup. He paused beside the driver's door and looked once more at the joyful sounds echoing across the playground. Then he opened the encrypted message again. This time there was only one sentence waiting beneath the first notification. "The board cannot move until you personally approve the decision." Malcolm closed his eyes for a brief moment, knowing the quiet life he had protected for so many years was beginning to collide with the truth that could no longer remain hidden. Rain fell lightly over Charlotte the next morning, turning the city streets into ribbons of silver beneath the early sunlight. Inside Whitmore Technologies, every television mounted throughout the headquarters displayed the same financial headline. "Market uncertainty deepens as investors await strategic rescue." Employees gathered quietly in break rooms, speaking in lowered voices that carried equal parts concern and hope. Charlotte walked through the building greeting engineers, receptionists, custodians, and interns by name, refusing to hide inside her office while her company struggled. She believed leaders should be visible when confidence disappeared. Even so, every reassuring smile she offered became a little harder to maintain. In the executive conference room, Evelyn ended another unsuccessful call before placing her phone face down on the polished table. "They declined again," she admitted. Whoever controls Horizon Legacy Capital refuses every meeting request. The chief financial officer rubbed his forehead wearily. If Horizon agrees to become our strategic partner, the markets will stabilize almost immediately. They have the liquidity and reputation to restore confidence overnight. Another director added quietly, "No one has ever met their majority owner in person. Even Wall Street only knows that every major decision requires one final approval from a private chairman." Evelyn stared out the window. Find him. Across town, Malcolm drove Ava to school through the gentle drizzle. She watched raindrops race down the passenger window before looking toward her father. "Daddy, are you worried about something?" Malcolm smiled without taking his eyes off the road. "Why would you ask that?" "Because when you are thinking really hard, you tap your thumb on the steering wheel." Malcolm laughed softly. "You notice everything." Ava reached over and rested her small hand on his arm. "Mom used to say that when life gets loud, kind people should stay quiet until they know how to help." Malcolm felt his throat tighten for just a moment. She was a very wise woman. After dropping Ava at school, he drove not toward home but toward a modest brick building with no corporate signs, no security gates, and no indication that it housed one of the most influential investment organizations in the country. Inside, a receptionist stood immediately. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks." He greeted her with the same warmth he showed everyone else. "Good morning, Diane." She handed him a slim folder. "The board has already arrived." Malcolm walked through quiet hallways lined with simple artwork instead of displays celebrating wealth. When he entered the conference room, every director rose to their feet without a word. The silver-haired chairman spoke first. "We delayed the vote until you could be here." Malcolm remained standing at the end of the table, studying the financial reports spread before him. Charts reflected Whitmore Technologies, thousands of employees, pension funds, small investors, and communities whose futures depended upon the company's survival. One director finally asked, "Should we proceed with the acquisition?" The room fell perfectly still. Malcolm slowly closed the folder. "We are not here to collect broken companies," he answered calmly. "We are here to protect people whenever we can." Several directors exchanged thoughtful glances. "Then what are your instructions?" Malcolm looked toward the rain falling beyond the glass windows. His voice remained steady, carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had long ago stopped measuring success by numbers alone. "Arrange a meeting with Whitmore Technologies tomorrow morning." The chairman nodded. "Under what name should we announce your attendance?" Malcolm paused for only a heartbeat before answering. "Tell them the chairman of Horizon Legacy Capital will personally attend." Hundreds of miles away, the confirmation email arrived in Charlotte's inbox. She opened it with trembling hands while Evelyn leaned over her shoulder. Neither woman noticed that the signature contained only one line, a name they had seen countless times, but never connected to the quiet father they believed they already knew. Malcolm Brooks, Chairman, Horizon Legacy Capital. The executive boardroom on the top floor of Whitmore Technologies had never felt so quiet. The polished walnut table reflected the gray morning light pouring through walls of glass, while cups of untouched coffee cooled beside stacks of financial reports. Every director had arrived early. Every conversation ended the same way. Who is he? Why has no one ever seen him? Will he save the company? Charlotte stood near the window with her hands folded, watching employees enter the building below. She could feel the weight of thousands of livelihoods pressing against a single meeting. Evelyn sat at the head of the table with perfect posture, though the confidence that had once defined her had begun to fade. At precisely 9 o'clock, the elevator doors opened outside the boardroom. A young executive assistant stepped inside first. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced respectfully, "the chairman of Horizon Legacy Capital has arrived." Every person in the room stood. Footsteps echoed steadily down the hallway. Calm, unhurried, deliberate. The boardroom doors opened. Malcolm Brooks walked inside wearing the same navy blazer he often wore to Ava's school events, carrying nothing more than a simple leather portfolio. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Charlotte stared as though the world had forgotten how to move. Evelyn's face lost all color. One director looked from Malcolm to the company profile resting in front of him before whispering almost involuntarily, "It cannot be." Behind Malcolm entered several senior executives from Horizon Legacy Capital, each greeting him with unmistakable respect. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks. The documents are ready, Chairman Brooks. Your seat is prepared, sir." The room remained frozen. Malcolm acknowledged each greeting with a polite nod before looking toward Charlotte. His eyes carried the same kindness she had always known, unchanged by the silence surrounding him. Finally, he turned toward Evelyn. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Every assumption she had built over months seemed to collapse without a single argument. Malcolm quietly placed his portfolio on the conference table and addressed the room. "Thank you for meeting with us." His voice remained gentle, measured, almost familiar, yet every syllable now carried an authority no title could create on its own. The chief financial officer hurriedly stood. "Mr. Brooks, Chairman Brooks. We had no idea." Malcolm offered a small smile. That was intentional. He took the seat reserved for Horizon's chairman while every member of his executive team remained standing until he nodded for them to sit. Charlotte could barely take her eyes off him. Memories rushed through her mind. The old pickup truck, the community pantry, school reading days with Ava, homemade soup in a modest kitchen. None of it had been an act. None of it had been a disguise meant to impress anyone. It had simply been the life he chose to live. Evelyn finally found her voice, though it was little more than a whisper. "The $1 million. Malcolm looked at her with neither triumph nor resentment. "It was a generous offer," he answered calmly. "But some things become priceless the moment you try to purchase them." No one interrupted. No one shuffled papers. Even the gentle hum of the building's ventilation seemed to disappear. For the first time since the crisis had begun, the boardroom was completely silent, not because of fear, but because every person present had just discovered that the quiet father they had underestimated possessed the one thing no balance sheet could measure, a character that had remained exactly the same whether he was standing beside an old pickup truck or sitting at the head of one of the most powerful investment firms in America. No one reached for the contracts. No one checked a phone. The silence inside the boardroom carried a different weight now, the kind that follows the sudden collapse of long-held assumptions. Malcolm opened his leather portfolio and removed a single folder before sliding it gently across the polished table toward Charlotte. "This is Horizon Legacy Capital's proposal," he said calmly. "It includes emergency financing, long-term restructuring support, and a commitment that no hourly employee will lose a job because of this crisis." Charlotte looked down at the documents, her eyes widening as she turned each page. The terms were generous. There was no demand for controlling ownership, no attempt to strip the company of its identity, and no hidden clauses designed to exploit desperation. She looked back at Malcolm, unable to hide her surprise. "You could take everything," she said quietly. "Instead, you are offering us a chance to rebuild." Malcolm folded his hands. "A company is more than its stock price. It is the people who arrive before sunrise to unlock the doors, the engineers who stay late solving problems, the parents working overtime to provide for their children. They should not pay for decisions they never made." Around the table, several directors lowered their eyes. Even seasoned executives who had negotiated billion-dollar agreements throughout their careers found themselves unusually quiet. Evelyn slowly stood from her chair. For the first time in decades, the woman known for commanding every room seemed uncertain of where to place her hands. She walked toward the large conference window, watching clouds drift above the skyline before turning back to Malcolm. Her voice was softer than anyone in the room had ever heard. "I judged you by your truck, your house, your clothes, and the balance I imagined was in your bank account. I never stopped to measure your character." Malcolm listened without interruption. She took another slow breath. "I offered you money because I believed every man had a price. I was wrong." Malcolm reached into his portfolio once more and quietly placed an unopened envelope on the table. Evelyn recognized it immediately. It was the cashier's check she had prepared during their first meeting. The seal had never been broken. "I kept it only so I could return it personally," Malcolm said. Not to embarrass you, but to make one thing clear. My answer was never about the amount. Evelyn looked at the untouched envelope, and her shoulders slowly fell as the realization settled completely. $1 million had seemed like an impossible fortune when she believed she was speaking to an ordinary father. Now it represented something much smaller than the lesson before her. Charlotte walked around the table until she stood beside Malcolm. "Why did you never tell me?" she asked gently. Malcolm smiled with the same quiet warmth that had first earned her trust. "Because I wanted the first thing you knew about me to be my heart, not my net worth." Tears gathered in Charlotte's eyes, but her smile remained steady. She reached for his hand without hesitation. No cameras were present. No reporters waited outside the door. There was only a room filled with people who had just witnessed the rarest kind of wealth, the kind that could remain completely hidden because it had never depended on being seen. Evelyn slowly extended her hand toward Malcolm. "If you are willing," she said with quiet humility, "I would like the opportunity to earn the respect that I should have offered from the very beginning." Malcolm accepted her handshake with calm grace, proving once again that true dignity does not celebrate another person's mistake. It simply creates room for redemption. Spring arrived quietly in Charlotte, bringing fresh green leaves to the old oak trees that lined the streets outside Jefferson Elementary. Whitmore Technologies had regained its footing, not because someone had seized control, but because trust had been restored where fear had once taken root. Employees returned to work with renewed confidence, investors praised the company's steady recovery, and newspapers celebrated one of the most remarkable corporate turnarounds of the decade. Yet Malcolm Brooks never appeared on magazine covers. He declined every interview, refused every award, and quietly asked Horizon Legacy Capital to remove his name from every public announcement related to the rescue. Life, in the ways that mattered most, remained beautifully ordinary. Every morning he still drove Ava to school in the same aging blue pickup truck. Every Thursday they still delivered groceries to the community pantry. Every Friday evening they still cooked dinner together while soft jazz drifted through their modest home. One Saturday afternoon, Charlotte joined them for the neighborhood volunteer day. She wore jeans, work gloves, and a simple baseball cap as she helped repaint playground benches beside Malcolm and Ava. Parents who had known Malcolm for years welcomed her without hesitation. They did not see a celebrated chief executive officer. They simply saw another neighbor willing to lend a helping hand. As the afternoon sun settled lower across the park, Ava tugged gently on Charlotte's sleeve. "Can I ask you something?" Charlotte smiled and knelt beside her. "Of course." Ava looked at her with the complete honesty only a child could offer. "Would it make you happy if I called you Mom someday?" "Only when you are ready." Charlotte's eyes filled with quiet tears. She wrapped her arms around the little girl and whispered, "It would be one of the greatest honors of my life." A few yards away, Evelyn stood beside Malcolm watching the moment unfold. Months earlier she had believed wealth could solve every problem and influence every heart. Now she understood that the greatest treasures had been standing in front of her all along. She looked toward Malcolm with a gentle smile. "Thank you," she said softly, "not for saving the company, but for showing me the difference between success and significance." Malcolm looked across the playground where laughter echoed beneath the warm afternoon sky. "Real wealth is measured by the lives we leave better than we found them," he replied. The breeze carried the sound of children playing, the smell of fresh-cut grass, and the peaceful rhythm of an ordinary day that had become extraordinary in all the right ways. No one spoke again for several moments. They simply watched a little girl run across the playground holding the hands of the two people she loved most. And in that quiet silence, every title, every fortune, and every assumption faded into the background, leaving only dignity, grace, second chances, and the timeless truth that the richest hearts are often hidden behind the simplest lives.